The thunder of hooves broke the prairie silence as Jack Whitley crested the hill, dust billowing behind him like a vengeful ghost. The year was 1875, and Jack hadn't called anywhere home since the war ended a decade ago. His weathered face, bronzed by the relentless Wyoming sun, betrayed nothing of the storm within as he gazed down at the small ranch nestled in the valley below. "Come on, Diablo," he murmured to his midnight stallion. "Let's get what we need and move on before sundown." The ranch was modest, but well kept, a sturdy cabin with smoke curling from the chimney, a corral with a few horses, and a small barn that needed fresh paint. Jack had learned from experience that these isolated homesteads were usually good for water, maybe supplies if you had coin, and occasionally information. Never attachment, never roots. As he approached, a young woman emerged from the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. Her chestnut hair was gathered in a practical knot at the nape of her neck, but a few rebellious strands framed her face in the late afternoon light. "Hello there, stranger," she called, shielding her eyes from the sun with one hand. "Can I help you?" Jack reined in Diablo, keeping a respectful distance. "Just passing through, madam, wondering if I might water my horse and perhaps purchase some supplies." "Of course," she gestured toward the well. "Help yourself to water. As for supplies, depends what you're needing." As Jack dismounted, he noticed the subtle signs that told a story: the absence of men's boots by the door, the single glove hanging from a nail, the way her shoulders carried the invisible weight of too much responsibility. "Name's Jack Whitley," he offered, tipping his hat. "Lillian Novak," she replied with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Most folks call me Lily." Jack led Diablo to the water trough, watching as the horse drank deeply. "You running this place alone, Miss Novak?" A shadow crossed her face. "For now. My pa passed last winter. Pneumonia. Brother's off fighting Indians with the cavalry." She straightened her spine. "I managed just fine." Jack nodded, understanding more than she knew. "I'll just need some coffee beans if you can spare them, maybe some jerky for the trail. I can pay fair." Lily studied him for a moment, her gaze searching. "When's the last time you had a proper meal, Mr. Whitley?" The question caught him off guard. "Don't rightly remember. Few days maybe." She nodded as if confirming something to herself. "Well, I've got a stew that's been simmering since morning. Would you eat supper before leaving?" There was something in her voice, not pity, which he would have rejected outright, but a simple human kindness that made his practiced refusal die on his lips. "I wouldn't want to impose," he said instead. "It's no imposition." She looked around at the vast emptiness surrounding them. Truth be told, some conversation would be welcome. Against his better judgment, Jack found himself nodding. "Much obliged, then." The inside of the cabin was neat and warm, with a faded quilt hanging on one wall and a shelf of books that surprised him. The stew smelled of beef and sage, making his stomach growl in betrayal of how long it had been since he'd eaten anything not cooked over a campfire. "You read all these?" Jack asked, running a finger along the spines while she ladled stew into bowls. "Everyone," Lily replied. "Pa believed in education, even for daughters, said a mind needs tending same as crops." They ate at a small table by the window, the silence broken only by the clink of spoons and the occasional comment about the weather or the condition of the cattle Jack had seen grazing in the north pasture. It was the most peaceful meal he'd had in years. "This is mighty fine cooking, Miss Novak," Jack said, accepting a second helping. "Lily, please." She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Where are you headed, if you don't mind my asking?" Jack hesitated. He'd learned long ago that vague answers discouraged further questions. "Northwest, probably. Heard there's work in Montana Territory. Just drifting then." Her directness was refreshing in a way. "That's the life of a cowboy," he replied with a half-smile. "Never stay anywhere long." "Must get lonely," she observed without judgment. Jack shrugged. "Get used to it after a while." But as the evening lengthened into night, with Lily sharing stories of her father's homesteading days and Jack carefully selecting tales from his travels that wouldn't reveal too much, he realized how long it had been since he'd simply talked with someone who had no expectations of him. "It's getting dark," Lily noted as she cleared their dishes. "There's a cot in the lean-to if you'd prefer not to set up camp tonight." The sensible thing would be to decline, to saddle Diablo and ride out under the stars as he always did. Instead, Jack heard himself say, "If you're certain it's no trouble." No trouble at all. The lean-to was simple but clean, with a narrow cot and a small window that framed the rising moon. Jack removed his boots and gun belt, placing the Colt revolver within easy reach as habit dictated. He stretched out on the cot, expecting sleep to come quickly after a good meal and a roof overhead. Instead, he found himself staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else moving about in the next room. It had been so long since he'd allowed himself to be this close to another person's life that the sensation was almost uncomfortable. Morning arrived with the scent of coffee and bacon. Jack emerged from the lean-to to find Lily already bustling around the kitchen, her hair freshly braided and a determined set to her jaw. "I've got a fence line that needs mending on the north side," she said by way of greeting. "I don't suppose you'd be willing to lend a hand before you head out?" "I can offer lunch and more supplies for your trouble." Jack knew he should decline. Getting involved, even in this small way, went against the rules he'd set for himself. But the thought of riding away immediately felt abrupt after her hospitality. "I reckon I could stay till midday," he found himself saying. One day stretched into two as Jack helped with tasks that clearly needed more than one person: mending fences, repairing a leak in the barn roof, checking on a pregnant mare that was due to foal any day. He told himself it was just repaying her kindness, nothing more. On the third morning, as they sat drinking coffee on the porch, watching the sun paint the distant mountains gold, Lily broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "You could stay on, you know," she said quietly. "I could use the help, and there's plenty of work for a good hand in these parts come roundup time." Jack stared into his coffee cup as if it might contain an easier answer than the one he knew he had to give. "I'm not one for settling, Lily. Never have been," she nodded, unsurprised. "Because you don't want to be, or because something's chasing you?" The question hit too close to the truth. Jack set his cup down carefully. "Some men just aren't meant for roots." "I don't believe that," she replied, her eyes meeting his. "I think everyone wants somewhere to belong. Some are just more afraid of finding it than others." Before Jack could respond, the sound of approaching riders drew their attention. 3 men on horseback were coming up the trail, riding hard. Jack was on his feet instantly, hand moving to his gun. "You expecting company?" Lily stood, tension radiating from her slender frame. "No. That's Vernon Hollies and his boys. They've been trying to buy this land since Pa died, offering half what it's worth." Jack recognized the type immediately: men who took what they wanted and considered themselves entitled to it. He'd crossed paths with too many like them. "Morning, Miss Novak," called the lead rider, a heavy-set man with a florid face and expensive clothes that didn't quite fit his frame. "See you've got yourself some help." His eyes narrowed as they assessed Jack. "Mr. Hollies," Lily acknowledged coolly. "This is Jack Whitley, a friend passing through." "Friend, is it?" Hollies smirked. "Well, friend or not, he should know this land will be mine come winter. No woman can run a spread this size alone, and that brother of yours might not make it back from Indian country." Jack felt Lily stiffen beside him, but her voice remained steady. "My answer hasn't changed, Mr. Hollies. This land isn't for sale." Hollies' face darkened. "Don't be foolish, girl. I'm being generous considering the state of things. That north pasture fence is down again. Your cattle are straying onto my property, and word is you couldn't pay the full tax assessment last quarter." Jack stepped forward slightly, not threatening but making his presence more apparent. "Sounds to me like the lady's been clear about her intentions, Mr. Hollies." The two younger men shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward their weapons. Hollies studied Jack more carefully, noting the way he carried himself and the worn but well-maintained gun at his hip. "This ain't your business, Cowboy," Hollies said finally. "Miss Novak here is just prolonging the inevitable. Smart thing would be to take my offer now before circumstances force her hand." "I believe circumstances just changed," Jack replied evenly. "The fence is mended, the cattle are where they belong, and Miss Novak has help now." A tense silence followed as Hollies weighed his options. Finally, he jerked his horse's head around. "Think carefully, Miss Novak. My offer won't stay open forever, and there are other ways to acquire land when people are unreasonable." The three men rode off, dust billowing in their wake. Jack watched until they disappeared over the rise before turning to Lily. "How much of what he said is true?" She sighed, the brave front faltering slightly. "The taxes are a struggle, yes. The drought last summer meant less hay put up and prices are down for beef. But I'm not selling to the likes of Vernon Hollies. This land was my father's dream." Jack nodded, making a decision that went against every instinct that had kept him alive and free for the past decade. "I'll stay a bit longer, just till you get things sorted." The relief in her eyes was quickly masked by practicality. "I can't pay much. Room and board is enough for now," he interrupted. "We'll figure the rest out later." That evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day's work, Lily carefully asked the question that had been hovering between them. "What is it you're running from, Jack? If you don't mind my asking." Jack stared into the flames, weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he said, "During the war, I was with the 4th Missouri Cavalry. Did things I'm not proud of. After, I couldn't go home, couldn't face the people who knew me before." He paused. "Then there was a situation in Kansas. Man drew on me, I was faster. His brothers didn't take kindly to that, swore they'd see me hang." "So you keep moving," Lily finished for him. "It's simpler that way. No attachments, no one gets hurt when I have to leave quickly." Lily was quiet for a moment. "My mother died when I was 10. Fever took her in 3 days. I remember Pa sitting on this very hearth, telling me that grief is the price we pay for loving people. Said it was always worth the cost." Jack looked at her then, really looked at her, the strength in her slender shoulders, the intelligence in her eyes, the quiet determination that had kept this ranch going against all odds. "Your Pa sounds like a wise man." She smiled softly. "He would have liked you, I think." The days fell into a rhythm as spring warmed into summer. Jack rode fence lines, repaired outbuildings, and helped plan for the coming harvest. He found himself watching the sky less for signs to move on and more for indications of weather that would affect the ranch. He noticed how Lily hummed when she worked in her vegetable garden, how her laugh sounded when he told her about the time he tried to ride an ornery mule in Texas. He also noticed Hollies and his men riding the boundaries of the property, watching, waiting. One evening in early July, Jack returned from checking on a watering hole to find a stranger's horse tethered outside the cabin. His hand went to his gun as he dismounted, approaching cautiously. Inside, he found Lily sitting at the table with a thin, exhausted-looking young man in a dusty cavalry uniform. "Jack," she said, her face alight with joy. "This is my brother Lucas. He's been discharged. He's home." Novak stood to shake Jack's hand, his grip firm despite his obvious fatigue. "Lily's been telling me how you've kept this place going. I'm in your debt, sir." Jack felt a curious mixture of relief and something that felt uncomfortably like disappointment. With her brother returned, Lily no longer needed his help. It was time to move on, just as he always did. "Glad to have been of service," Jack said formally. "Now that you're home, I should probably be on my way." "Nonsense," Lucas exclaimed. "The way Lily tells it, you've become essential around here. Besides, one man can't run this place alone any more than one woman can, begging your pardon, sis." Lily was watching Jack closely. "At least stay through the harvest, Jack. We could use the extra hands." Jack hesitated, caught between the pull of the open trail and the increasingly insistent tug of something he'd been avoiding for months, the feeling of belonging somewhere, of being needed. "I'll think on it," he said finally. That night, unable to sleep, Jack sat on the porch steps watching the stars. The sound of the door opening behind him was soft, but he knew it was Lily without turning. "Lucas told me more about his time with the cavalry," she said, settling beside him. "Said there's rumors of trouble with land speculators throughout the territory. Men using intimidation to force smaller ranchers out. Hollies," Jack surmised, "among others. There's talk of an investigation by federal marshals, but that could take months." Jack nodded, understanding the implications. "All the more reason for me to stay on a while longer." Lily turned to look at him directly. "Is that the only reason, Jack?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Jack had spent so long guarding his words, his actions, his heart, that honesty felt like stepping off a cliff. "No," he admitted finally. "It's not." She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and placed her hand over his. "I'm glad." The touch of her hand was like a brand, marking him as something he hadn't been in years, a man with connections, with responsibilities to others, with something to lose. It terrified him. It anchored him. August brought the heat, and with it, increasing pressure from Hollies. Cattle mysteriously broke through fences. Their best spring dried up overnight, the work of dynamite rather than nature. A fire started near the south pasture, though they managed to extinguish it before it did serious damage. Through it all, Jack remained, working alongside Lucas to keep the ranch functioning. He found himself sharing more of his past carefully at first, then more openly as Lily's acceptance never wavered. She told him of her dreams for the ranch, of the books she loved, of her mother's recipes that she still used in the evenings. Sometimes, Lucas would play his harmonica while Jack and Lily sat side by side on the porch, not quite touching but increasingly aware of each other's presence. It was during one such evening, with Lucas inside writing a letter to a girl he'd met before enlisting, that Jack finally voiced the thought that had been growing in his mind. "I've been thinking about what comes after harvest," he said, watching how the setting sun turned Lily's hair to fire. "Have you now?" she asked, a hint of wariness in her voice. "I was thinking I might winter here, if that would be agreeable." Lily turned to look at him, her expression guarded. As a hired hand, Jack swallowed hard. "No, not just that." "Then as what exactly?" He'd faced armed men with less trepidation than he felt now. As a man who's found something worth staying for. Someone. The smile that bloomed on her face was like sunrise after the longest night. "I was hoping you might see it that way." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, the kiss of two people who had learned that life could take away as easily as it gave. Their second was not. The confrontation, when it came, was inevitable. September had brought a successful harvest, and with it, a renewed offer from Hollies, this one delivered by his lawyer and accompanied by thinly veiled threats about the consequences of refusal. "This is ridiculous," Lucas exclaimed, pacing the cabin after the lawyer left. "They can't just force us to sell. They can make it mighty difficult to keep operating," Jack pointed out. "The question is, how far are they willing to go?" The answer came 3 nights later when Jack was awakened by the smell of smoke. He was out of bed instantly, grabbing his gun and boots. "Fire!" he shouted, rousing Lucas and Lily. "The barn!" They raced outside to find the barn engulfed in flames, the horses inside screaming in terror. Without hesitation, Jack and Lucas ran toward the inferno, covering their faces with damp bandanas. The heat was overwhelming as they forced open the stalls, slapping the panicked horses on their flanks to drive them outside. Jack was leading the last mare out when a burning beam crashed down beside him, sending sparks flying. By the time the sun rose, the barn was nothing but smoldering ruins. Miraculously, all the animals had been saved, but the structure and the winter hay stored inside were complete losses. As they stood surveying the damage, exhausted and smoke-stained, a rider approached. It was one of Hollies' younger men, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Hollies sends his condolences about your unfortunate accident," he recited woodenly. "Says his offer still stands, but only for the next 24 hours. Lucas lunged forward, only Jack's restraining hand preventing him from dragging the messenger from his horse. "You tell Hollies we know this was no accident," Jack said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And his offer isn't accepted." The young man swallowed nervously. "He thought you might say that, said to tell you there's worse things than losing a barn." After the messenger departed, Lily, Lucas, and Jack gathered at the kitchen table to assess their situation. "Without that hay, we'll have to sell half the herd before winter," Lucas calculated grimly. "Even then, it'll be tight. We could rebuild the barn," Lily suggested. "Ask the neighbors for help. And next time it might be the house that burns," Jack pointed out. "Or worse." They sat in silence, the weight of their predicament settling heavily on their shoulders. Finally, Jack spoke. "I've been saving most of what you've paid me. It's not much, but it would get us through the winter if we're careful." Lily and Lucas both looked at him in surprise. "Us," Lucas repeated. Jack met Lily's eyes across the table. "I'm not going anywhere, not unless you want me to." The smile that lit her face was worth every mile he'd ridden to get here, every fence he'd mended, every doubt he'd overcome. "I have an idea," Lucas said slowly, "but it's risky." The plan was simple in concept, difficult in execution. They would make it appear that they were giving in to Hollies' demands, arranging a meeting to discuss terms. But they would ensure that the county sheriff and a federal marshal Lucas knew from his cavalry days were present, hidden and waiting to witness any threats or admissions of responsibility for the fire. "Hollies is arrogant," Lucas explained. "He thinks he's won. Men like that tend to gloat." Jack nodded, knowing it was their best chance but acutely aware of all that could go wrong. "We'll need to be convincing. He can't suspect anything." The meeting was set for the following afternoon at the Novak ranch. Lily would receive Hollies while Jack and Lucas appeared to be preparing to leave, loading a wagon as if in defeat. Sheriff Taylor and Marshal Davis arrived at dawn, concealing themselves in the root cellar with a clear view of the front porch where the meeting would take place. "Whatever happens," Jack told Lily as they waited, "stay calm and keep him talking." She nodded, her jaw set in determination. "I've been underestimated by men like Vernon Hollies my entire life. He won't see me coming." When Hollies arrived, flanked by his sons and his lawyer, he had the smug satisfaction of a predator closing in for the kill. "Miss Novak," he said, removing his hat with mock courtesy, "I see you've come to your senses at last." Lily stood on the porch, her posture rigid but her expression carefully resigned. "It seems I have no choice, Mr. Hollies," Recent events have made it clear that I'm fighting a losing battle." Holly smiled coldly. "Sometimes a demonstration is necessary to help people see reason. I trust there won't be any more unfortunate accidents once we come to terms." Jack, loading a trunk onto the wagon nearby, tensed at the near admission but continued his task, exchanging a meaningful glance with Lucas. "I suppose that depends on how reasonable your terms are," Lily replied, her voice steady despite the anger Jack knew she must be feeling. "My original offer stands," Holly said, signaling his lawyer to produce the papers. "Though given the damage to the property, I'm being more than generous." "The damage you caused," Lily said quietly. Holly's face hardened. "Be careful with accusations, Miss Novak. Accidents happen all the time in this country. Barns burn, wells get poisoned, people disappear. It was exactly what they needed." Jack straightened from his task and moved toward the porch, his hand near his gun. "Is that a threat, Mr. Hollies?" he asked. Before Hollies could answer, Sheriff Taylor and Marshal Davis emerged from their hiding place, badges gleaming in the sunlight. "I believe it was, Mr. Whitley," the marshal said, along with a thinly veiled confession to arson. What followed was chaos. Hollies' younger son went for his gun and was promptly disarmed by Lucas. The lawyer began stammering about misunderstandings. Hollies himself stood frozen in shock before attempting to bluster his way out. "This is absurd. I never admitted to anything. We heard enough," Sheriff Taylor stated flatly. "You're under arrest for attempted coercion and conspiracy to commit arson." The marshal here has been investigating similar incidents across 3 counties. "Seems you've been busy, Hollies." As Hollies and his sons were led away in handcuffs, the reality of what they'd accomplished began to sink in. The immediate threat was gone, though rebuilding would still be a challenge. "Well," Lucas said, watching the prisoners being loaded into the sheriff's wagon, "that was more excitement than I expected when I came home." Lily laughed, the sound bubbling up with relief and joy. "What do we do now?" Jack looked at the ranch around them, the burned barn, the cattle in the pasture, the house that had somehow become home when he wasn't looking. "Now," he said, "we rebuild." The neighbors did indeed come to help, once word spread of Hollies' arrest. Within a month, a new barn stood where the old one had burned, filled with hay donated from surrounding ranches. As fall deepened toward winter, Jack found himself thinking less about the open trail and more about putting down roots that had seemed impossible for so long. On a crisp October evening, with the first snow dusting the distant mountains, Jack asked Lily to walk with him to the ridge overlooking the valley. They stood together, watching the sun set over the land her father had claimed and she had fought to keep. "I've been thinking," Jack said carefully. "A dangerous pastime," Lily teased, her hand finding his. "I've spent most of my life running from something or towards something, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home." He turned to face her fully. "I'm tired of running, Lily." "Then don't," she said simply. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn box. "This belonged to my mother. I've carried it with me all these years, never thinking I'd have cause to use it." Inside was a simple gold band with a small pearl. "It's not fancy, it's perfect," Lily interrupted, her eyes shining. "Lillian Novak, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I can't promise it will always be easy, but I can promise I'll never run again." "Jack Whitley," she said, framing his face with her hands, "I asked you to stay for supper all those months ago, hoping you might stay for a day. I never dared hope you'd stay forever." Their wedding was held in the new barn on Christmas Eve, with Lucas giving the bride away and neighbors from miles around attending. The county judge performed the ceremony, and afterwards there was dancing and feasting that lasted well into the night. As Jack held his new wife close during their first dance as husband and wife, he marveled at how a simple invitation to supper had changed the entire course of his life. "What are you thinking?" Lily asked, noticing his expression. "I'm thinking that for a man who never stayed anywhere long, I sure got lucky when I stopped at your ranch." She smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the future they would build together. "And I got lucky when a dusty cowboy agreed to eat supper before leaving." "Except I never did leave," Jack pointed out. "And you never will," Lily replied with certainty. Spring came to Wyoming, bringing new calves, green grass, and news that Hollis had been sentenced to 10 years in territorial prison for his crimes. The Whitley Ranch, for that was what it was now, with Jack and Lily as partners in every sense, flourished under their combined care. On a warm May evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lily placed Jack's hand on her still flat stomach. "We'll need to add another room to the house," she said softly. "By winter." Jack's eyes widened as he understood her meaning. "Are you certain?" Her smile was radiant. "As certain as I was that you were a man worth asking to stay for supper." As the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, Jack Whitley, no longer a drifter, no longer a man without connections, held his wife close and marveled at how the simple question of whether he'd eat supper before leaving had led to a place where he never wanted to leave again.